you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
And you had a telecom business here. You learned everything about telecom, which naturally led you to move to Norway.
Yeah, it's a natural path.
Yes.
Natural path to take.
The planes were full of people doing this
Yeah.
in Chicago at the time. So how'd you do that? What made you decide to go to Norway? What made you decide to go to that company? Tell us about that story, because it's an interesting path, but it seems like a very important one in your story.
So there's a couple of reasons. I have a lot of family over there. I was going out with a Norwegian girl, and of course there's always a girl in the story somewhere.
Does explain a lot.
And I also got an opportunity out there. I was actually hired by one of the top technical companies in the world at the time, which is Alcatel, to be a technology expert in Internet protocol, which I knew nothing about 6 months before. So I ended up going there.
But I think that's a great one, which is in these emerging technologies that come out. You know, a lot of people think that people all studied this in school or whatever they did. And the question of when you're in these new areas that are emerging, it's really the person who wants to be the proverbial student of the game to get there. The guys from Decision Sciences, we hold a patent together, and I don't have a computer science background, but the world is kind of emerging that way. If you can dive into it, there's no reason you can't learn it.
Right.
But a lot of people, I think, assume, well, that's not my background, or I didn't study that in school. But
so I'm here to tell you right now, you don't need to be an engineer to get excited about technology or to understand the technology. I mean, I think it's just a matter of will. If you want something bad enough, you're excited about a certain area, and you become passionate enough about it, you can teach yourself. There's plenty of, in any area. In fact, you can almost say that it's smart to think out ahead 3 or 5 years to what the world's going to look like, and to go and really understand what the implications are of the things that are happening between now and then. Because that's how you get ahead of the ideas.
Yep, absolutely.
Is to do that. And of course, you have to have a passion about what it is that you're diving into.
Yeah, you have to be passionate, because you'll go talk to people and they'll look at you and say, well, that's not what's happening now, or that's, you know, the people don't understand it. So you really have to have a confidence in it to be able to do it. I think you're exactly right. Now, so you go to Norway, and the company was at Alcatel at the time. So you get there, you're now an expert.
Yeah, I'm now giving the seminars to the engineers who have been engineers for 20 years on how this Internet protocol thing works. Yeah.
And so talk about that story, because this turned out to be very cutting edge. I remember, interestingly, I was talking to somebody the other day, one of the young people in my company, who was saying how when I was in college we had answering machines. You know, it was because there were no cell phones. There was mobile phones, but they were always in cars. And, you know, it wasn't actually the technology. Because when I was in business school, I went to Japan, and all over Japan, people had handheld phones.
Right.
So it wasn't there was a technology gap. There was an adoption in U.S. culture. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, why do we keep the phone attached to the car?
Right.
And so it's interesting to go to these different markets. So you go to a market that I think was very different than our own at the time. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I ended up getting recruited into a job at a company called Telenor. And Telenor is sort of Norway's version of AT&T, kind of a big national operator. But they were very innovative. It was the bubble years. They were investing a lot of money in the future. 3G was about to take off. It was all the rage. They were paying tens of billions of dollars for 3G licenses all over Europe. It was a crazy time. And
this is really the cutting edge.
Yeah, it's cutting edge. But the interesting thing is, as you point out, at the time, when I started this job in wireless, they didn't even have color displays yet. This is before the first WAP phone, if anybody remembers that back in the day. You know, the Nokia 7110. I mean, it was so primitive you couldn't believe it. So actually what they ended up doing is creating services with premium SMS. So we would create services, and I think I told you a funny story about Norway. So tax records in Norway are public. So every year that the tax records would come out, they would release basically what's like a search engine, or someone would make a search engine out of it, where you could look up anyone's income and see what they have in the bank right now. It's crazy. So and of course, everybody got crazy.
Here's the great part. That's really interesting, but how do you make a business out of that, an entrepreneurial idea? This is really interesting.
So we created a text message service called Gold Digger. And and we would advertise it in the bathrooms, in the women's bathrooms, and all the in all the nightclubs. And they could go and they could text in somebody's name or phone number and find out whether this guy that's been trying to pretend like he's the rich guy, with the yacht, actually had any money, and So it was crazy.
That is hilarious. How'd it do?
It was a pretty big success, and we ended up doing some other interesting things, like there was a radar thing I think I told you about. But being a former police officer, I think I'm going to skip the radar story for tonight.
It's a good one, though. For Q&A, we'll save it. If you're interested,
all right.
Vote for it.
And then we also did a game, which was we licensed Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. If you guys remember the TV show, we made a mobile game out of it, and we made the largest reward for winning. The prize was $100,000 to win.
Wow.
At the time, was by far the biggest ever in terms of the game, and that was such a popular launch of the service that the gaming commissions in Norway approached the government, and the government ended up shutting us down because they were worried about the competition from mobile games that they had for the government-sponsored lotto.
Really?
So there was such a big response to it. It was crazy.
And this is a fascinating example, though, and I gave my Japan example. You can learn a lot from other places. And in this country, we have a tendency to think, well, because we create a lot of technology, that we're always on the cutting edge of adoption. But so much in the mobile area happened other places before it happened here.
So Scandinavia and Japan, there was something called iMode, which is, for the early enthusiasts, was kind of considered the most advanced mobile internet. And then Scandinavia had the most advanced market in terms of premium SMS and other services, which made a lot of money. I mean, this is the entire country of Norway has roughly half the number of people that Chicago has.
Wow.
And they were pulling in, $50 million a year back in the 90s with premium SMS services. So it was a big market. And
I remember being in Japan. My project was to look at Motorola over in Japan versus the NTT Docomo. NTT was the big AT&T of Japan. And, I'm a Chicagoan, I'm an American, I want Motorola to do well, right? And I met the people here, and they couldn't have been nicer to us, spent lots of time with us. NTT Docomo people, we spent time with them, and they were really very friendly, and I was blown away by how innovative they were. I didn't think of the Japanese as innovative in a way that, you'd think of a Motorola at the time. And, as you see what happened, NTT Docomo has gone on to become one of the great mobile successes in the world. And just really reminds you that you can't be biased about where you think interesting ideas and innovation are really coming from. You got to go eyes open.
Yeah.